Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One Stop Co-op Shop, where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at Townsfolk Tussle, a 1 to 5 player boss skirmish game. And no disclaimer needed for this one. They sent me a review copy to check the game out, but I am sending it on to another reviewer after I'm done. I definitely enjoyed this one when I covered it during the Kickstarter, but I had some concerns about things like action loss. Did they fix them in the meantime? Let's find out and get to the list. So first, my number 5 is what I just mentioned, a full-on con, and that is the potential for action loss in the game. And what I mean by this is during the boss fight, there are lots of ways you can lose actions. Terrain can cause you to lose actions, card effects can cause you to lose actions, the AI can cause you to lose actions. But beyond like actually losing an action, sometimes based on what the AI does or what you do, you'll just be way out of position and your entire turn will just be running toward the boss and not really doing much. That can happen for multiple turns in a row. But the reason this is my number 5 after being a major concern when I covered the Kickstarter is that they did a great job minimizing this in the game's development. It still exists and it still is a problem, and I'll say especially at higher player count games where you each have one hero, one character, because then the chance of you literally not doing much of anything for a little while or being knocked out of the fight early is very real. But in solo or 2-player where you each control 2 characters, I think this is really a minimal concern. And number 4, I have a full-on pro, although I won't call it full-on, it's close to a mix, and that is the terrain in the game. So each of the bosses has a unique mix of terrain, and each terrain piece has a card that explains its special features, different actions you can use it for, or effects it has on the game, and this is all pretty great. The positive here is that I love how the terrain changes up the feel of the battle. I love that you can actively interact with it, and not only you can interact with it, the bosses, since they call out specific terrain, they will have individual pieces that they prioritize or interact with or go towards. I love that. It makes the game feel unique with each boss. It makes it feel like they're kind of interacting with the environment. But there are a few negatives that, like I said, almost bring this down to a mix, although I'm still going to call it a pro. First of all, it can be a little bit annoying at the beginning of each fight to track down all the terrain tiles and all the cards for them. That's a little bit frustrating for setup and teardown. And also, as cool as they are for interaction, it can be totally random if they actually do anything for you. Like a lot of them, you just roll a die and they'll often do nothing, and you'll kind of like waste that action or waste that part of your turn. 3 is also a pro, a full-on one this time, and that is the boss activation and the diversity between the bosses. So for each boss's turn, you basically just flip over a card. It tells you who they go after and what they do. And honestly, it can feel very random. Like a lot of these boss battlers, the upcoming Primal, or again, KDM, you can feel like you have no idea what the boss is going to do, and they're just kind of destroying you with random bouts of luck. But here's the thing, just like those other games, and definitely here as well, as you learn the bosses, you get to know what kinds of things they do, and what some of their like high priority terrain pieces are, and what their worst actions are. So it's the kind of thing that can be frustrating on your first play, but really rewards repeat plays as you get to know kind of their strategy and tactics and that kind of thing. And I also want to call out the scenarios, because each of the bosses gets different like special powers if you face them later in the sort of 4 scenario arc that makes up like a full campaign in the game. And the final boss fight is this like cool, unique scenario with unique terrain and unique cards and equipment. I love that. I think it really changes up and gives each boss its own feel. But I'm back down to a mix, although leaning pro for the number 2, which is the tactical combat. Pretty important in a boss battler. And the negative here, that again is keeping it a little bit at a mix, it's almost a pro, is that like a lot of these games, sometimes there's just not that much interesting going on with the tactics. If you're far away from terrain, if your weapon isn't ranged, if you don't really have anything majorly going on, you'll often just walk up and punch the boss. But on the positive side, sometimes the combat is really interesting, and sometimes the powers have major effects, and sometimes your equipment lets you do really cool things, or the terrain becomes really interesting. And one element I do want to call out that I love are these little achievements you get each round, and they give you rewards if you pull off certain things during the fight. And that little push to do things that you might not do otherwise can make the exact same boss fight feel a little bit different and encourage you to try out different things. And finally, my number 1, full-on pro, I love this, and that is building up your character with gear. So you start out with unique gear for your character. You can unlock other unique gear by doing certain things in the gameplay, so you can have kind of like this fun discovery element. You have so many weird and goofy combos you can try out along with your special character, along with the bosses you fight and the terrain you encounter. So many things you can do. And then on top of that, I love that you get gear in other ways. Every time you defeat a boss, one of you gets a unique gear card based on that boss that like thematically matches them and gives you even cooler powers. When you get to the final scenario, you get extra new gear to give to the sheriff who's going to have like some special thing to do in the scenario. It's just all a ton of fun. And anybody who likes kind of builds for their character and leveling up and the feeling of getting stronger and stronger against increasing opposition, I think is really going to love this element of the game. So overall, I would definitely recommend Townsfolk Tussle to people who like skirmish games or boss battler games. One of the best things about it is that you can play an entire like full 4-scenario campaign in one night of gaming. It's not like an endless campaign game, although, you know, some people like those, but you might not. I think if you like leveling up, interesting bosses, terrain in your combat, this game's got a lot to love. But on the other hand, you might want to avoid this one if you don't like randomness. Tons of randomness in here. Things can totally destroy you by the drop of a hat. And finally, one note that even though the game seems kind of cartoony fun, it's got a lot of graphic elements as well, so don't buy this thinking it's a kid's game. It won't go over too well. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you at the next stop.